Hello, my name is Mike Dorsey, and welcome to Skills Live. I've been invited to talk today a little bit about independent educational evaluations and the evaluation of classroom programs. Before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about Endicott College, where I teach. If you can change the slide, the mission statement for our program basically boils down to the little motto at the bottom: infusing the science of behavior into the art of teaching. We began the program as a special education program with embedded ABA coursework where you can get both your special education license as well as qualify to sit for the Behavior Analysis Certification Board exam. If you hear noise going around here, that's my dog, Dropkick Murphy, that's sort of walking around. The programs that we have change, please. The programs in Applied Behavior Analysis at Endicott include both graduate programs, undergraduate, and paraprofessional. We offer programs both in face-to-face and online. Change. We have several different degree programs at the graduate level. Our graduate degree programs include a 48-credit master's where you get your special ed license and qualify to sit for the BCBA. We have a non-licensed master's. We also have a master's in autism and applied behavior analysis that embeds the courses for the BCBA. We have a 21 credit non-degree graduate certificate program in autism and an 18-credit non-degree graduate certificate if you have a master's degree in education or psychology and you want to sit for your BCBA. Again, all of those programs are offered both face-to-face as well as online. We just instituted a 14-credit undergraduate concentration in autism, an ABA that's focused on individuals that want to get their BCBA. And if you can change to the paraprofessional slide, we have a certified ABA technician program that is basically 26 modules of a self-paced PSI program. Change. The full-time faculty are myself, Dr. Tom Zane, and Dr. Mary Jane Weiss. Emily White, change. Emily White is an MSED, and she runs our Tech paraprofessional program. Again, that's something that's basically focused on training classroom aides, paraprofessionals, and interestingly enough, we get a lot of parents that sign up for that. We have a fairly change. I'll get used to this change thing here in a minute. We have a fairly extensive list of adjuncts because we teach so many different programs, both face-to-face and online, that we have a number of people that teach with us. And you can see the list here. Change, please. We also have established relationships with a number of what we call partner programs that are located for the most part in and around Boston, although you'll see the River Street School in Hartford, Connecticut, and Seven Hills out in Worcester. And those are places where we actually teach our face-to-face courses, both to the staff that work in those programs as well as anybody that lives in the area. And what it does is it makes things much more convenient for people so they don't have to travel all the way to Beverly to go to classes. Change. We have a couple of annual events that I just wanted to make people aware of. One is every August, we have a national conference on ethics and behavior analysis, which this year we began co-sponsoring with the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. It came off as a great conference. And it's something that I would encourage you to come out to if you're at all interested. And in April, we have a parenting conference that is not for professionals, but just for parents of kids on the spectrum. And it's co-sponsored by people like Autism Speaks, the Doug Flutie Foundation, National Autism Center. You'll see the list down there. Change. And by the way, just as a last little marketing thing, we own 3 private beaches, and we were voted the second best college in the United States, beach college in the United States. Of course, the first one, I don't know, it was either in Florida or California, but we beat out the rest of them. So you can sort of see some of the pictures there. Now, it's just a tad chilly at those beaches today because it's in the 30s, so you might not want to go to the beach. Change. The last thing about our program is we have a couple of things that are under construction. We have an application into the Department of Higher Education right now in Massachusetts to establish a PhD program in Applied Behavior Analysis. That is going to be a synchronous online program where we'll be able to have students from literally all over the world. There'll be a residency requirement where you'll spend a couple of semesters with us. It's a 4-year cohort model program. And then we're in the very early stages of developing an EDS degree in Applied Behavior Analysis. That's sort of our answer to the new regulatory standards that limit people from taking the 6-course sequence and sitting for the BCBA exam who have a degree in something other than psychology or education. This way, if you come to us with a master's degree in basically anything that's human service related, you can get an advanced degree in EDS in Applied Behavior Analysis. It'll be 30 credits and you'll be able to sit for the BCBA exam. So if you want any information, if you'll change the slide, you can just get a hold of me and I'll be glad to send out any information you'd like about our program. Change. So the title of the talk today is going to be Understanding the Role of Behavior Analysts in Special Education Due Process, or what does ABA services really mean? And you'll kind of get to that quote about what do ABA services really mean as we go through this program. Change, and then change one more time. So the basic premise of this is that it's really not uncommon for parents in school districts to end up disagreeing on what is best for their child and for the student. Teachers, of course, are the ones that are trained in special education, some of them trained in both special ed and applied behavior analysis. They're the professionals, they're the experts, but it's not always the case that the parent in the school district come to an agreement on what ought to be in the IEP as far as services, placement, focus, etc. Change. In 1975, the federal government established IDEA, the Individuals Disability Education Act, which basically was a law that was supposed to establish safeguards for children between the ages of 18 to 21, and it covers about 14 different specific categories of disability. Change. One of the goals that Congress had in passing the 97 amendments to IDEA was to basically strengthen the parent's role in what was a process that was somewhat overwhelming for parents. And often, as you'll see in the slide in the cartoon there, parents end up feeling awfully outnumbered. They walk into a room with special ed teachers and OTs and PTs and SPED administrators, and it's just the two of them sitting there at the end of the table feeling quite intimidated. So Congress decided that they needed to do something about that. Change. One of the things that the federal law did was establish something called an independent educational evaluation, or IEE, as I'll refer to it kind of broadly through this talk. And basically what it does is sets up a right for the parent to have an evaluation conducted by a qualified examiner who is not employed by the school district, but someone that is brought in from the outside that can help evaluate the child and the child's needs. Change. IE is not limited to evaluating only their academic program, but you can get an independent evaluator to come in if there's a conflict between the parent and the school as far as OT services, PT services, speech therapy, basically anything that would be included in an IEP for a child. Parents can request an independent educational evaluation and a professional to come in and help sort of give an independent, unbiased approach to what ought to be involved in that child's IEP. Change. Some of the things that Congress talked about when they established that was that they said, and this is a quote, "The failure to receive and consider parental information, including evaluations they may obtain, directly denies the parent the pivotal role they should enjoy in the development of their child's placement." I've been doing these kinds of evaluations in Massachusetts now for the better part of 25 years. And it's become quite normal in Massachusetts for independent evaluators to come into school districts and work with both parents and the school district to give sort of an outside opinion and to try to help bridge the gap between the parents' concerns and what the school district is recommending change. Basically, what they're trying to do is sort of make it to where there's an even playing field so that there's a balance between what the federal regulations require, what is going on in the IEP team meeting, and the ability for the parents to really have an impact on getting their wants and needs met and what they have to what they think about their child's needs being recognized and respected. Change. Independent evaluators often provide support for parents' opinions. And when a school district refuses to consider what the independent evaluator is providing, it also prevents the child's evaluation from being considered in the development of the IEP. One of the comments that I often hear when I go to an IEP team meeting after developing one of these reports is that I'll go through and make my recommendations. I will have submitted a written report, but then I'm told by the people in the room, we're only required to consider your recommendations, but we're not required to implement them. And quite often, my recommendations sort of fall on deaf ears, which can often lead to going into due process, going to the Bureau of Special Ed Appeals, having hearings, that sort of thing, go on from that point. But parents are not the only ones to ask for independent evaluations. It's not unusual for me to get a phone call from the school district and say, you know, Dr. Dorsey, we're having a conflict with a parent. We can't come to a resolution. We really don't want to go to a hearing, and we'd like to hire you. And very often what I hear is that both the parent and the school district at the same time come to an agreement that they want an independent person to come in, sometimes even signing an agreement that they'll follow whatever the independent evaluator recommends. I've just been asked to come in and do an evaluation of a high school program for a young man on the autism spectrum, and serving as sort of an independent objective mediator. And that's something that really can be very valuable, save a lot of time, a lot of money for the parents and the school district, and sort of move things along in a much more amicable way. Those are my favorite evaluations to do when both sides agree to me being there. If you'll change, please. So it makes a really important, IDEA makes an important provision for parents to seek an independent evaluation at the school district's expense whenever the parents disagree with the obtained evaluation by the school district. But I do need to point out that it's only at the school district's expense if either the school district agrees to pay for it or if the parents fall below a certain poverty level and they're willing to share their tax records with the school district in order to support their right to having the school district pay for this evaluation. So who's qualified to provide an independent evaluation? It's the school district's responsibility to help ensure that the parents are able to find independent evaluators, but parents are certainly able to go out and do it on their own. And they need to find someone who has the training and experience both to collaborate with the school staff, but also has the professional training and experience to be able to provide this kind of an evaluation at a professional level. Change. Federal IDEA regulations recognize that school districts' role in safeguarding the standard of care, and it really stipulates that evaluators have to be qualified to be able to provide these kinds of services. Change. When is a school district required to provide it? Basically, anytime a parent requests an independent evaluation, but the bottom line is that the parent needs to wait until the school district has completed their evaluations and that there's actually something that they disagree with. It's not unusual that I get calls from parents, and especially very young parents of children on this, or parents of very young children on the spectrum, and they call and they say, well, we really haven't had the evaluation by the school district yet, but we want to get you involved. We want you to do an independent evaluation. And what I try to, explain to the parents is, no, you need to let the school district do their job, do their evaluation, see what the recommendations are, because you might agree with what the recommendations are, and that you really shouldn't reach out and get an independent evaluator involved until after you've gotten to that point. Change. So it really can't be invoked until the parent has refused to, thus the parent can't refuse to consent to the evaluation, but only after disagreeing with the evaluation and the results of the evaluation. And again, like I said earlier, you really have to wait for seeking reimbursement for it without first seeing the evaluation through the district, and make sure that you can't work things out. I mean, the whole goal here is that for the parents in the school district to be able to work cooperatively to provide an IEP for the child that really meets the child's needs, and it's something that the school district can agree with as part of the team. Change. So when you conduct an IEE, one of the things you want to do is base the evaluation and recommendations on best practices and or standards supported by recognized professional entities. So basically what I've done here is listed some of the things and tried to show you some of the things, some of the areas. Behavior analysis in practice, the new journal for ABAI, information that's provided by APBA, certainly any of the work by Lovas or any of the professionals that are shown in the pictures there. Change. So you might ask me, well, why am I talking about this with a bunch of behavior analysts? And the reason is that, first of all, the commitment of our field to the 7 dimensions of applied behavior analysis that were discussed by Beowulf and Risley, and especially our focus on objectivity, things being focused on socially significant behavior, a demonstration of functional relationships, the procedures being described technologically. So it really is something that we want to have very observable, quantifiable, that there's no question about what's going on, what's being done with the child, why it's being done, and if what's being done with the child is actually having an effect on the child's educational status and challenging behaviors or not. Change. In addition, as we all know, the scientific attitude that applied behavior analysts embrace, including determinism and empiricism, but experimentation, parsimony, philosophical doubt, those are all things that are very important in the way that our profession is constructed, and the things that are really sort of the underlying tenets. So it makes us be able to go into a school district and look very objectively at what's being provided, look at the way it's being provided, and look at the data to see if changes are really occurring in the child's life, if their skills are improving, if the challenging behaviors are being diminished, and if things are being done in a reasonable way. Change. So in short, applied behavior analysts are committed to the science of human behavior. And we look at education just like we look at anything else through the lens of the science of human behavior. And we want to make sure that the goals and the needs of the child are actually being met. Change. So specifically for children with autism, some of the things that you should look at are Educating Children with Autism, which is a National Research Council report, the treatment of autism, the report of the United States Surgeon General in 1999, the New York State Department of Health and Clinical Practice Guidelines, No Child Left Behind, an IDEA of 2004, which specifically requires scientifically validated educational approaches. And then, of course, the National Standards Project, which is part of the National Autism Center. All of those are standards that you can use when evaluating educational programs. So the goal of an IEP, change please, is to assess the needs of an individual child relative to the educational services provided to or recommended for the child. It is not a critique of the school, not going there during program evaluation, looking at the needs of that child and what that child needs in order to make reasonable progress towards all of the different goals and objectives that have been established for the child. Change, please. Some of the things that you should include when you do an evaluation is basically have objective data relative to the provision of appropriate educational services. You should have observable data of the actual delivery of the service. It's not always what's on paper that is important. Looking at the child's records is something that should be part of an evaluation, but actually watching the delivery of the service and how the child is responding to those services is an incredibly important thing to do. I often go into classrooms and I start taking data independent of what's been taken by the teachers so that I can see things like, for example, how often does the child have the opportunity to engage in social interactions with peers. And the recommendations that you make must be relative to the services and not placement. I think that's a really important point. When you finally get to the point where you're going to write a report and you're going to make recommendations, independent evaluators are basically prohibited by federal law from making specific recommendations about placement. I'm not supposed to go in and see a child in a public school and say, well, I think this child needs to be at Melmark, New England. Or I think the child needs to be at the May Institute. What I need to do is go in and say, I think this child needs to have the following services, and be very, very specific about the kinds of services that the child needs. So I think the child needs one-to-one, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. I think the child needs a full day, full year program. But you can't just say full year, full day. You need to talk about how many days a year, how many hours a day. For a child that is severely impaired, you're going to want to talk about, like, the child needs 240 school days a year, 6 hours a day, potentially with no more than 5 consecutive school days out of school on vacation or holiday. So you need to be really specific about the kinds of services, how many hours of OT, how many hours of PT, the kinds of discrete child training. Should the child be in an inclusion classroom? How many hours should the child be in an inclusion classroom? So the services are the important point, and you should never, ever reference the kind of placement the child needs to be in. Change. Now, the problem is that many professionals recommend, quote unquote, ABA services or inclusion in, quote, an ABA classroom, unquote. And the problem with doing that is there really is no standard in our field for what the term ABA services or an ABA classroom really means. So a project that we've been working on for probably the last almost 10 years is to come up with some objective definitions of exactly what those terms mean so that school districts, parents, and other professionals can look at that and basically compare what the child is being given to what the child needs and look through all the different areas that might be appropriate. So myself, Emily White, Mary Jane Weiss, and I have been working on developing what is essentially a survey instrument for classrooms and programs that we refer to as the general characteristics of a successful ABA classroom. Change, please. Let me walk you through a couple of these. First of all, just to show you that we've got about 61 individual items that we've identified within 8 different topic areas. The topic areas include things like program philosophy, assessments that need to be done, program evaluation, teaching practices, staff qualifications, how staff supervision is done, etc. Change. Some examples, specific examples, is like in the area of assessment. One of the things that we would look for is whether or not the individual student educational goals are selected from a standard developmentally based assessment instrument. Something like the ABLES or the VB-MAP are ones that we like to see people use, but there might be others that have been used. A lot of times what you'll see is that school districts or even private schools will take the time to develop their own developmental scales And we try to get them to stay away from doing that and to use ones that are standardized, published in peer-reviewed journals, that there's research to support them. Another assessment that we would want to see is that staff conducts functional assessments, including functional analysis of challenging behavior before they establish any kind of a behavior plan, and that the design and implementation of programs to reduce stereotypic destructive behaviors are based on some sort of a functional analysis or assessment. Change. In the area of teaching practice, some of the things that we would look for in this assessment of a classroom is that the program employs an array of scientifically validated behavior analytic teaching practices. Things like discrete trial training would certainly come to mind in that, PECs, any number of different things that we all know that are in the literature. Another would be that educational and behavioral protocols are implemented by and demonstrated as effective by the consulting behaviorist analyst or special education teacher prior to training or assigning responsibility to the classroom staff. And what I mean by that is something that we kind of euphemistically refer to as the I do, we do, you do method. We don't want consultants coming into a classroom, standing in the back of the room, taking notes, and then walking up and saying to the teacher, okay, here's what I want you to do with Johnny. What we really like to see is that consultant stands, watches, takes some data, does an assessment, and then sits down and actually works directly with the child to make sure that what they're going to recommend to the teacher actually works. Then they use that as a jumping off point to be able to say to the teacher then, why don't you come over and join me and let me show you how I'm doing it. And as we do that, sort of transition the responsibility for implementing the educational approach from the consultant or the special education teacher to the teacher or the aide or whoever else is going to be doing this. And then eventually that person that designed it would then back off and allow the person to actually take responsibility and giving them feedback on how they're doing and providing that educational approach. This also is a great way when you're doing parent training to make sure that the parent actually understands what it is you're trying to tell them to do. The last thing under teaching practice is that all behavior reduction plans incorporate differential reinforcement of appropriate, functionally equivalent replacement behavior. One of the things that we find is that a lot of times you'll see behavior reduction plans and there'll be a DRO built in, but the DRO and the behaviors that are targeted with the DRO have absolutely nothing to do with the challenging behavior. And if you're not reinforcing behaviors that allow the child to access the reinforcers that are maintaining the challenging behavior in a way that doesn't require them to engage in that challenging behavior, then you're never going to eliminate the challenging behavior that you're trying to reduce, no matter what level of behavior intervention procedure you might employ. Change. Some of the things as far as observational data that you want to think about doing while you're doing an educational evaluation, and this is all based on the child's functioning level and educational needs, are things like opportunities, prompts, and reinforcement of social language with peers. I really like us to see that every child has some opportunity throughout the course of the day to have that prompted, reinforced level of social interaction. And the higher functioning the child, the less impaired they are as far as their autism is concerned, the more that ought to be part of their everyday experience in the classroom. You also want to look at what the educational and treatment protocols are that are being used in the classroom currently, and you want to look at whether there's good fidelity to those educational and treatment protocols and whether the staff are actually implementing things the way they're supposed to be done. One of the things I always look at, and one of my favorite all-time words, is the word contemporaneous. Are people actually taking data as the behavior occurs? Or are they running a discrete trial session for 10 or 15 minutes, and then while the child takes a break, sitting and reporting what the child's responses were during that discrete trial session? We want to make sure that the organization and the structure of the class is good. We want to look for safety issues in the class. And we also want to look at qualifications. Change, please. So one of the things that I've always found to be useful, and you can go and find this on your own, is if you go to a website by a law firm called Coton, Crabtree, and Strong, and Coton is with a K. Bob Crabtree, who is an old dear friend of mine and a lawyer that has been doing special education evaluation law for many, many years, wrote a paper that's published on their website that you can get to for free. It's called Mistakes Evaluators Make. And I just want to run through a couple of the mistakes because I think it really sort of points out some of the things that many evaluators do that sort of discredit the recommendations that they might make when they go to an IEP team meeting. One is failing to assess the student's testing performance in a larger context of his or her educational history, family situation, psychosocial makeup. An evaluation can only provide a snapshot of the student. You're only going to be in there doing this for a brief period of time. Those teachers are with that kid 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. You're there for two or three hours at the most. So you really need to look at all the records and get a sort of a broader context to what the child's needs are. Change. The next one, and I've seen this occur on any number of occasions, is you can't do an independent educational evaluation without talking to the teacher, without talking to the special ed administrator, without talking to other school personnel. Talk to the paraprofessional that's in the room, the aide. Make sure that you really understand what their perspective is and why they're doing what they're doing. Change. Number three is writing reports that are poorly organized, full of jargon. Please don't use the term DRO in your report. And for God's sakes, don't use establishing operation because nobody's going to know what you're talking about. If you use boilerplate recommendations, after you do 2 or 3 of these, people are going to catch on to it and your credibility is going to be out the window. The other is that you really need to be very careful about making sure that your reports are individualized for that particular student. Because as we all know, autism is a spectrum. And there are some children who are very barely involved with autism, and there are some children who have very significant autistic characteristics. Some kids need discrete trial training. Some kids need a one-to-one. Other kids need to be involved with neurotypical peers. Some need an FBA. Some don't. So I think you need to be really careful when you start making recommendations. Don't recommend 40 hours of discrete trial training for every single kid that you do an evaluation on. Change. 5 is limiting program and service recommendations only to things that are available in the student's school district. If the school that you're evaluating, if the child is in a school that you're evaluating doesn't have ABA services, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't recommend ABA services. If that's what you think the child needs, you need to recommend it, and it's up to the school district to figure out how to go about providing it. If they don't have little cubbies where they can do one-to-one discrete trial training, but you think that's what the child needs, make that recommendation. Don't go in and look to see what they do and then tailor your recommendations only to what they already provide. Change. Failure to consider and report the likely risk of a student if your recommendations are not implemented. One of the things that many reports that I've read over the years fail to do is at the end of the report, you really need to have a concluding paragraph that basically says, in my opinion, if you do not follow the recommendations I'm making, here's what I think eventually may occur with this student. The child may end up going from an inclusion classroom into a self-contained classroom. The child may need an out-of-district placement. The child may need a residential placement if the challenging behaviors are so dramatic in the school district and the parents are not able to work successfully with the child if they don't follow your recommendations. So it's important that you let people know what your opinion is as far as their failure to follow your recommendation. Change. One of the things is not clarifying for parents that there's often a real difference between recommendations that are clinically desirable and those that are legally mandated. School districts are not required to provide Cadillac services. They're required to provide services that are going to meet that child's needs. And be able to provide them with a free and appropriate education. As I said earlier, appropriate is based on what the science, what the literature, what other professionals and standards have come up with as far as students on the spectrum are concerned. And we need to sort of limit our recommendations to what is really necessary. It's not a Cadillac model. It's not maximum feasible benefit. It's free and appropriate public education. Change. Refusing to leave the citadel. One of the things you often see is that people will have the child come to their office. They'll meet with the parents. They'll evaluate the child, and they'll write the report. The credibility of a report like that is very limited. You need to leave your office after you do that. Doing that is fine, but you need to leave your office after you're doing it. You need to go to the kid's home. You need to see the child at home. You need to see the child at home with his siblings, with his parents, how things are going at home. You need to go to the school. Follow the child around. And don't just watch them in a discrete trial session. Watch them on the playground. Watch them in the cafeteria. Watch them interacting with neurotypical peers so that you get a very broad picture of what the child does, how they interact, and what kinds of services and support that child needs. It's not unusual that what you'll see is a child that is doing very well at school in a very highly structured environment, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. But then when they go home and they've got 2 or 3 siblings, maybe some younger, some older, mom's home early in the afternoon, maybe beginning to cook dinner and trying to follow a behavior plan that's been written by some BCBA that really doesn't understand the demands on the parent and the things that the parent is really being distracted and not able to follow that. Maybe what that child needs is home-based services and some support in the home. But you also need to understand that home-based services, although they're the right of a parent for them to get those kinds of services for their child, they're really only an extension of things that are being targeted for generalization and maintenance of goals and objectives that are already included in the child's IEP. Change. This one is very important. Working exclusively as a parent or a school district evaluator. You really will lose credibility if every single case you take, you're being paid by the parent, or every single case you take, you're being paid by the school district. What you want to do is balance, and you want to make yourself available. And the way to gain that kind of credibility is that your client really is not the parent. Your client is not the school district. Your client is the child. And you need to make people aware from the beginning that you're going to listen to what they have to say. You really care about what they believe. But what's really important is what your opinion as a professional is about what that child needs. Change. Trying to act as both an evaluator and a legal counsel. You know, I've taught courses in special ed law for the last 10 or 15 years. But one of the things I really avoid when I get involved in one of these evaluations is trying to tell parents anything about what their legal rights are or what the child's legal rights are. That's what special ed attorneys, that's what advocates are for, and you need to let them do their job, but you need to make sure that the advocate or the special ed attorney isn't trying to do your job. You're the one providing the recommendations. They're the ones that are advising the parent. Change. So if you go onto Cote and Crabtree and Strong's website, you'll also see some other great papers that Bob Crabtree has written. One is Mistakes Schools Make, and the last one that I think is great is Mistakes Parents Make. In the Mistake Parents Make, he often talks about how to make sure you keep all the records you need to do, that you need to have throughout the course of your child's educational career. Don't go in with a scorched earth policy. Bob talks about, you know, be friendly, be a part of a team, try to work with the school district as best you can. When I get involved with a set of parents in one of these evaluations, one of the things I tell the parents is they're never allowed to argue in an IEP team meeting with the school district, and they're required to bring donuts and coffee to every single meeting for everybody on the team, so that it really is sort of a cooperative thing. Now, before we finish up here, one of the things I want to tell you is that if you want to ask any questions, if you send me an email at info, at skillsglobal, skillsglobal.com. Those will come up on my computer, and I'll try to get to as many of your questions as I can. So here's the part where you start asking questions. So the first question is, can a parent request an IEE from a BCBA? Absolutely, positively you can. The only thing that you should make sure you do, as I said before, is make sure that the school district, if, for example, if you've got like a 2.5 to 3-year-old child that's just getting into the school system, you need to make sure that you let the school system do their evaluations first, make their recommendations first, and then if you don't agree with their recommendations, then you can come back and ask for an independent evaluation and see what that independent evaluator is going to recommend. But be careful what you ask for, because it is not unusual for a professional to go in, see what services are being recommended and provided by the school district, and it may be that those are the appropriate services for that particular child. You know, like I said before, I listen to what parents have to say. I care about what parents have to say, but it's really what my opinion is that I'm being asked to provide. And there are cases where I don't agree with what the parent really wants. The next question is, how is the person who will be conducting the independent evaluation typically selected? Do the parents get to choose, or the school district? Well, it depends on who's bringing them in. If the parent is the one that's requesting the independent evaluation, the parent is the one that can select who the independent evaluator is. If the school district is bringing them in, then the school district is going to select who it is. If it's a cooperative thing, then it's going to be something that the two parties are going to get together. And what often happens is the two parties will put sort of names on a list, and they'll look for names that the two will agree with, and then they'll contact somebody that both sides will agree with. How much time is usually approved by the school district? And can they cap the number of hours? I guess that's a point of negotiation. Certainly if the parent's paying for it, that's up to the parent, what the person charges, how much can you afford. One of the things that parents often ask me is, how many hours is it going to take? And what I try to tell them is, it's much like hiring a lawyer to defend you. You can't really say until you get into it to tell how long it's going to take to do it. If it's something that's capped, and it's capped at a brief number of hours, then the chances are the independent evaluator is really not going to be able to do a thorough job. How does one become an evaluator? Well, I certainly think that it's not something that somebody that's just finished their master's in their BCBA ought to be doing. You probably wouldn't have the credibility to be able to do that. But beyond that, it's something where you let people in the profession know that you're doing these things. You put it on your website, you tell parents, you tell parent groups, you contact attorneys in school districts and let them know that you're interested in doing independent educational evaluations. Another one is, what's the best way for parents to find a good SPED attorney? In Massachusetts, there's any number of really good SPED attorneys. We probably have more than any other state around. But you can go to places, there's a website called Wright's Law, W-R-I-G-H-T-S. In Wright's Law, they have a number of resources for parents. They have ways to be able to find that. The Shriver Center, the Eunice Kennedy Shriver Center, which is part of UMass Boston here in Massachusetts, has a list of independent evaluators, not just behavior analysts, but independent evaluators that are psychologists or special education teachers, OTs, etc. You can always get a hold of the Shriver Center and ask to see their list. And then the last thing I would do is I would go on the BACB website and look for BCBAs that live in your area. Contact some of them and ask them if they know of anybody in the area that does those kinds of evaluations. Well, we're really getting a lot of questions here. Can parents choose who they want to do their IE? Yes, absolutely. You have every right in the world, and the school district has no legal basis for refusing to let someone do it unless the school district can prove that the person is not a professional and not qualified to do it. So if you go get somebody at your local convenience store to come in and do it, the school district is going to be able to say no. If you get a board certified behavior analyst, the school district really is going to have basically no grounds to be able to say no. The person, in my opinion, should either be licensed in their profession or board certified if you're a behavior analyst and your state hasn't gotten to the point of licensing behavior analyst yet. Those are really the sort of major bottom line qualifications. Another question is, how often do you think school districts request an IEE? School districts don't request them probably nearly as often as they should. I don't think they see them necessarily as a way of avoiding conflicts between parents and school districts. And I think it comes down sometimes just to an issue of trust between the school district and the evaluator. But the other thing, as I said earlier, that you have to be really careful about is finding evaluators who always work for the school district or evaluators who always work for the parent. If you really want to trust somebody, you want somebody that's no more than a 60-40 split between being paid by school districts and being paid by parents. What's the timeline for an assessment plan? 60 calendar business days or school days? This is especially important as holidays are approaching. What's the timeline for an assessment plan? I guess I really don't know the answer to that question. I would think, though, that the 60-day would be business days, school days, and certainly not calendar days. If you go into No Child Left Behind, 94-142, all the laws that have specific timelines, all of those are based on school days and not calendar days. How can BCBAs do their best to get along with school districts? Seem often school districts meet BCBAs with resistance. I think what you got to do is treat them with the respect that you want them to treat you with. You need to go in there and show them respect. As I said, one of the mistakes that many evaluators make is they don't talk to the teachers. They go in, they stand in the back of the room with a clipboard and a pad and a pen, and they take notes, and then they leave and they never talk to anybody. One of the things I try to make sure of every time I do one of these evaluations is that I schedule time to observe the child in as many different settings and as many different activities as I possibly can, but that I also schedule time while I'm there to be able to meet with as many different people from the school district as I possibly can. If I can meet with a SPED administrator, if I can meet with the teachers, if I can meet with the paraprofessionals, the more of them I can meet with, the better. And in fact, one of the things I like to do, and I found to be extremely successful, is to meet with all of those people, sometimes individually, sometimes as a group. But the last person I want to meet with is the SPED administrator, and I want to meet with that person alone. And I want to be able to sit with them and say, look, I really haven't completed my evaluation. I haven't been able to give it a lot of thought yet. But let me tell you some of the things I'm thinking, and let's talk about it and have a professional dialogue with that person and be able to go over what some of your recommendations are, respecting the fact that some of the things you're going to recommend, if you're going to recommend a full year program with the same teachers and the same curriculum and the same bill and all the things, that might be something that's going to be extremely difficult for them to be able to do. And you have to figure out how can you help them sort of work through that kind of an issue. All right, we've got another one here. Where can we get a full list of the characteristics of the ABA classroom? If you send me an email, I'll send you a draft copy of it. This is something that we're going to be sending out in a survey in the next several months. And we're going to do sort of a social validity evaluation of it. We're going to send it to BCBAs and parents and special education teachers and administrators, and we're going to get them to sort of rate the things that we think are important characteristics of an ABA classroom. And we're going to try to get feedback from all those different stakeholders to try to tell us, yes, this is important, no, that's ridiculous. And I'm sure we're going to get a broad range of evaluations and recommendations, and we'll see where it goes from there. Hopefully, we'll be able to publish this document somewhere in the next year or two. So it looks like that might be all of the questions we have for tonight. I want to thank you very much for your attention. I hope I was able to cover the things that you were interested in and sort of review what independent educational evaluations are about and how you might be able to help families in securing appropriate educational services for their kids. Thank you very much.